The moon, the biggest mystery of mankind. It inspired the ambition to leave our home planet.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other thing.
50 years ago, the first astronauts step onto the moon. Now we want to return, and this time we're coming to stay. Man and the Moon, a special kind of love story. Everything began no less than 4.5 billion years ago. The Earth is still young and makes its rounds alone in the endless universe. When, from the depths of space, a great celestial body begins to approach. The two planets merge. A cosmic union from which our moon emerges. If mankind had been around at the time, they would certainly have spread joyful words of this birth. Because the child of the Earth, our moon, is an extraordinary stroke of luck. We all carry its DNA inside us. Perhaps that is why we are constantly looking for and discovering more details of this passionate story. Is the moon our place of yearning?
Simply a beautiful place for the mind, the imagination, and what might be there.
Without the moon, one could say there would be no life on Earth.
The moon inspires songs, descriptions, and paintings.
The moon is just a part of being a human. It kind of speaks to all of us.
What would we be without the moon? Some of the most beautiful music compositions are dedicated to it, like Claude Debussy's Ode to the Moonshine, Clair de Lune. Since the beginning of time, it has been our nocturnal companion that encouraged us to think about the nature of life. About becoming and passing. Because the moon is reborn every month. The fascination can also be expressed more prosaically in the form of datasets. It's our closest neighbor. A flight to the moon only takes 3 days nowadays. It has gigantic mountain ranges. The temperatures fluctuate between extremes. Unlike the Earth, the moon has no magnetic field and no atmosphere. The family relationships of the moon are complex. It has at least 172 siblings in the galaxy. Small ones, green ones, some made entirely of ice. And new ones are constantly being discovered. Just recently, 12 new Jupiter moons. But none of the many moons is as close and familiar to man as ours. Prospective astronauts have had to make do with Earth as their training grounds for a long time. Lanzarote instead of Luna Incognita. But 50 years after the first moon landing, this could change. Matthias Maurer is training to fulfill his dream, the next mission to the moon.
Here we have the Apollo hammer. A hammer is the most important tool for any geologist because they can use it to break up or loosen stones, which they'll then fly back to Earth and examine. And I think there are still some tools lying around on the moon, including hammers like this, because the astronauts obviously prefer to take samples of the moon back to Earth. and they therefore left all the heavy equipment behind on the moon. You can also still find the astronauts' moon boots up there.
The team from the European Space Agency, ESA, is simulating a geological expedition on the volcanic island of Lanzarote. Space experts, geologists, astronauts and their trainers are rehearsing the next moon explorations here. They are reconstructing the partially forgotten know-how of the Apollo pioneers and testing new technologies.
Back in Apollo times, everything was mechanical. But today we also have electronic devices that we want to take with us to the moon, such as a tablet like this that we use to document which samples we're taking and send pictures directly to the ground. On the other hand, I'll also receive images from the control center that tell me exactly, take the stone on the left and not the one on the right that you wanted at first. It's actually very important to have that kind of information. But the problem I have here is that it's hard to operate a tablet like this with the thick fingers. That's why we've had a little tool developed by students. It's actually a pointer that I can use the tablet with. It works, but I think it could be a bit better. We have to work on that.
Will Matthias Maurer bring moon rocks back to Earth?
For one priceless moment in the whole history of man, all the people on this earth are truly one. One in their pride in what you have done, and one in our prayers that you will return safely to Earth.
4 days after man first set foot on the moon, astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins returned to Earth. And the world celebrates its first moonwalkers. But the Apollo 11 heroes have to watch the celebrations from the isolation lab. Too great is the fear of alien viruses. Richard Nixon declares the week of the Apollo mission the greatest in world history, only topped by the creation of the Earth. In the meantime, the valuable freight of the Apollo program is secured next door. The first rocks collected by man from another celestial body. The astronauts bring exactly 21.55 kilograms of moon back to Earth. After a total of 7 Apollo missions, our cosmic neighbor is 382 kilos lighter. The moon rock, the true treasure of the Apollo missions. To this day, it is heavily guarded and kept in the lunar sample building of the Lyndon B. Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas. Vera Assis Fernandez is a planetologist. She uses moon rock to research the creation of our satellite at the Leibniz Institute in Berlin and in Manchester. Getting her hands on the material was an adventure in itself.
For these Apollo samples that I have here, yes, I had to go to Johnson Space Center.
The scientist could not simply take the moon rock with her.
I wanted to go to Johnson Space Center and select them myself.
This is because the samples are stored in a high-security laboratory, shielded from the environment.
You have to go to the special area where the samples are kept. They have these chambers that are filled with nitrogen inside. Each is for a specific landing site. There's a cabinet for Apollo 15, the cabinet for Apollo 11, the cabinet for Apollo 17. They roll down the samples from a little canister into a dish, and then I had to pick fragments that I wanted.
Tiny quantities are finally sent to the scientists at the Leibniz Institute in Berlin. A small sensation of her research was the discovery of a new mineral that was first discovered through the moon samples.
This is a high titanium basalt, like is typical for Apollo 17. And here, okay, you had this initial minerals forming. It's called armalcolite. So arm for Armstrong, coal for Collins, and Al for Aldrin. The first time that this mineral was ever seen was on Apollo 11 samples.
The armalcolite was later also found on Earth. This supported Vera Assis Fernandez's theory of the creation of the moon.
The impactor could not be that dissimilar to the Earth, and that with this calcium isotope work and some other work is showing that maybe these two bodies, actually, their chemistry was more similar than being initially thought.
On Earth, it is easy to collect rock samples. Sometimes they even include meteorites from the moon. But only the Apollo rock provides genuine information about the history of the creation of Earth and Moon.
I'm a geologist, and the moon is a rock. It's a huge, and it has huge mountains, large, like taller than you have on Earth. So I think one part I like of the moon is the contemplation part of it. And the other one is because it's what we call a dead planet, so it's not as dynamic as the planet Earth. So it has preserved a lot of the history since its formation, which was not too long after the Earth formed. And it has preserved a lot of this history.
What is still hidden underneath the surface of the moon? At Solitude Castle in Stuttgart, the artist Hagen Betzwiese presents his story of the celestial body. He possesses a pretty impressive piece of the moon. How does an artist get a piece this size? Was it a gift? Not to forget, President Nixon sent moon samples to 135 heads of state as a diplomatic gesture in the year 1972 alone. Or is it stolen?
Of the 382 kilograms of moon rock that came back to Earth 50 years ago with the Apollo missions, the majority has mysteriously disappeared. In our work, As Good as a Moon Rock, the core consists of rabbit wire and plaster bandage. The surface is composed of a substance called JSC1 lunar regolith, a synthetically produced lunar dust commissioned by NASA simply because there is de facto not enough lunar dust.
Hagen Betzwiese dedicates himself to the side notes, investigates the bizarre questions of space travel. For example, what does the moon smell like? The lunar dust which stuck to the astronauts' suits fills the spaceship with the unmistakable smell of the moon. The astronauts described this smell very precisely. Hagen Betzwiese has a perfumer create the smell of the moon based on these descriptions. It is trapped inside these balloons. Voila! The moon smells like wood powder, gunpowder, and rotten eggs.
Even Buzz Aldrin confirmed that the smell of the moon that we created is very damn close to the smell that we have.
I think what is really interesting is what I call space awareness. Space awareness is the task or the notion to communicate what happens in space. And that's very interesting and exciting. It's fun, and you can do this in art as well as in science.
The artist is also already training for the next mission to the moon. Maybe they're still looking for another astronaut. Hagen Betzwiese is ready and waiting.
Astronomy is a very interesting topic in art, because art and science were united a long time ago and were then clearly separated for a long, long time. My personal story is that I originally wanted to be an astrophysicist, but realized when I was around 16 that I was actually much more interested in the image that science uses to communicate science than in doing science itself.
His As Good as a Moon Rock will be on display at the London Observatory on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing. No sooner had the moon been born than it was hit by a gigantic meteorite at its south pole. The South Pole Aitken Basin was formed. Countless other impacts damaged its thin crust. Lava flows escaped and cooled. A never-ending meteor shower finally pulverizes its surface. The result is the blotchy surface of the moon, its typical face that inspires myths and legends all over the world. In Berlin, in the Neues Museum, we meet cultural scientist and author Bernd Brunner. He has explored the question of why the moon has inspired cultural history more than any other celestial body.
For early mankind, the moon was simply the most striking object in the sky. Of course, you can see the sun, but you can't look into it because it's so bright that it blinds you. In this regard, the moon is a little more pleasing to the human eye. You could look at it, and it made you think about how to explain the different patches on the moon.
Mountains, craters, and the shadows they cast, seen from Earth. ... comma line, the moon face is looking fine.
Of course, you can read all kinds of pictures into these shadowy forms. Personally, I find the idea of a rabbit with long ears quite convincing.
In Chinese mythology, a hare hops over the lunar surface and mixes the elixir of life for the lunar goddess Chang'e. And from West Africa, the view in the sky reveals a crocodile in the moon. The fact that the face of the moon is so familiar to us also has something to do with the fact that we only ever see one side of it. In Astronomy for Amateurs, the French astronomer Camille Flammarion explained the phenomenon more than 100 years ago with a simple sketch. A boy spins the moon in a circle on a string. The hand spinning the moon is the Earth. We only ever see one half of the moon, namely the one attached to the string. The moon orbits our planet at a distance of 385,000 kilometers. It remains connected to us by an invisible band. This so-called bound rotation provides us with stability. Myths and legends about the face of the moon were already debunked in 1609 by Galileo Galilei and his telescope. Only 1 year later, he published his precise drawings of the moon's surface in Sidereus Nuntius, The Messengers of the Stars. The telescope revealed that the face of the moon actually is composed of terrain structures. Carolyn van de Bogert is a planetologist and today works on the most accurate images of the moon on behalf of NASA.
It's very exciting to see what somebody who had worked on the moon so long ago decided to draw. Also, just the things that we can see at night, but he also had a telescope that was just sort of the cut, the state of the art at the time. And what we have now from bigger and better telescopes and from missions is a closer and more high-resolution view of the moon. And so that lets us look at more of the details, but just from standing back at the big picture, Galileo already had a good view of what was actually going on the moon.
Galileo's Messenger of the Stars is still found in the University Library in Munster today. The Catholic Church put the work on the list of prohibited books at the time. Nevertheless, it was unable to prevent the spread of knowledge.
And that he was able to then put this into a book and then have the book printed so that other people could look at it is really sort of the beginning of the publication of scientific work and the sharing of scientific work, so that it wasn't just for a few elite academics or noble people to work on.
Carolyn van de Bogert and her team are very close to the next moon mission. The planetologist researches and teaches at the University of Munster. In 2018, she was appointed to the scientific team of the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter Camera by the US space agency NASA. The space probe orbits the moon, close above its surface, and takes photos of it in high resolution. Carolyn van de Bogert and her team are working on the evaluation of the camera data for the next moon missions, which are already being planned in detail.
We need to figure out which targets we want to take pictures of and to use the other instruments that are on board the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter to determine where we might like to collect samples of the moon, where new robotic missions could go on the moon. And so basically this was one of the major goals of the mission, was to define exploration sites for astronauts that are going to go to the moon.
50 years after the first moon landing, new destinations are possible.
The Apollo missions all had to go to the near side of the moon because they needed to communicate with the Earth and be available all of the time. So we have then maybe samples from just a handful of places on the moon, but if you just went to a handful of places on the Earth, you still wouldn't have a complete picture of how the Earth formed. And so we want to go back and get more samples to compare with this wonderful remote sensing data that we've recently been collecting.
The next generation of astronauts could land on the dark side of the moon and deliver further findings about the creation of our satellite. Long before space probes explore the moon, the night is the astronomer's hour. The meeting place for the best of their time in the 17th century is Paris. As the lights above the city are slowly extinguished, astronomers at the Paris Observatory enter the Great Dome to explore the sky. Today, as 350 years ago,
the instruments, everything is all old. You feel like you're slipping into the costume of a 19th century astronomer. Apart from the electricity, nothing has changed. You make a leap in time, go back centuries, and it feels like back then. Our predecessors worked here, so close to the sky, put their eyes on the eyepiece like we do. You feel very privileged.
The observations made here at the observatory are milestones in the history of moon exploration. At night, the sky is observed above the rooftops. And during the next day, the observations are transferred onto paper in the library, creating increasingly precise maps of the moon. But why do we need maps of the moon? What travelers should they serve in those days? Louis XIV founds the Paris Observatory. The Sun King gathers together the best astronomers of his time and founds the Royal Academy of Sciences. Here, works are created that shape the history of research worldwide.
Shortly after Galileo made his observations of the moon at the beginning of the 17th century, the Paris Observatory began its work. Its first director is Cassini. He arrives 2 years after its foundation in 1667. He immediately begins to study all sorts of objects, but devotes himself above all to his great project, to create a very precise cartography of the moon.
Très précise de la Lune.
A race with ever better telescopes begins. One more accurate drawing of the moon follows the next. But Giovanni Domenico Cassini has the edge. He allows himself a small artistic freedom with the very precise lunar map, a crater in the shape of a heart.
He drew sketches of the moon in different phases of the moon and put them together to form a complete map of the moon, which was the most precise at that time, and which remained the most precise, including small details and the ideas of contrasts, shadows, etc., until photography comes into play and the first photographs of the moon are taken.
From 1885 onwards, large format photographs of the moon's surface were taken here over a period of 10 years on the Large Reflector Telescope. The Paris Moon Atlas offers the sharpest mapping of the Earth's satellites to date.
It was here that the first photographic atlas was really created, which was subsequently even relevant for the preparation of the first Apollo moon mission. They still use these first atlases from the observatory.
For Pascal Descamps, the story of the Apollo landing therefore begins right here, at his favorite place above the rooftops of Paris in the 17th century.
The Eagle has landed. Roger, Ron thinks he's seen it. That's going to be a major task.
50 years after the first moon landing, the astronauts want to take off for their new moon missions. Zero-gravity tests during parabolic flight. Matthias Maurer is a member of the 6-person astronaut corps of the European Space Agency. His ultimate aim is the next lunar mission, for which the materials scientist is training hard. The basic training lasts 2 years, the majority of which he has already completed. The spaceship of the future, Orion, which will bring the next astronauts to the moon, is almost ready.
For the Apollo astronauts, it was really a departure into the unknown. It was a flight to the moon. Never before had anyone been on the moon or orbited the moon. And it was the very first landing on another celestial body. And that is, of course, a challenge to do something that no person has ever done before. I have great respect for the astronauts of the Apollo missions. And I think this is a great example for the astronauts of my generation, who want to go back to the moon and land there, and who want to continue the work of the Apollo astronauts.
Die Arbeiten der Apollo-Astronauten fortsetzen wollen.
But before they go up into space, they must first go down into the water. A few kilometers off the coast of Florida lies the next training station, an underwater base at the depth of 20 meters. The future astronauts have to stay underwater for 16 days, longer than any astronaut before. Another endurance test. Every step of the training places extreme mental and physical demands on the astronauts. Just like on the moon, outdoor missions are limited in time. Matthias Maurer only has a certain amount of oxygen underwater. His body has to learn how to use it sparingly. It's a rocky path to the moon. Today, astronauts are no longer just test pilots as they were in the early years. Today, they have to be multi-talented.
Astronaut zu werden bedeutet für mich
For me,
Wissenschaft zu
becoming an
machen.
astronaut means doing science. It means working with technology that's at the edge of what technology can do, what space travel really is. Technology has to work 100%, otherwise we can't fly. But space travel also means working in international teams. ISS, Americans, Russians, Canadians, Japanese, Europeans work together peacefully here. And that's very, very important for me, this international peaceful cooperation. And of course, the topic of adventure. There's hardly a profession that offers as much adventure as that of the astronaut.
Abenteuer bietet wie der Beruf des Astronauten.
When the astronauts land on the surface of the moon, they must be able to get their bearings immediately. Matthias Maurer tests a camera backpack for this purpose. It provides a 360-degree panorama of the lunar environment in real time. Japanese probes have discovered a lava cave up to 50 kilometers long on the satellite. A rover was developed for unknown terrain like this, which can move autonomously if desired.
Ein Rover wird in der Zukunft sehr viele Funktionen übernehmen. Das Gelände
A rover will take over many functions in the future, mapping the terrain, taking photos of the work, which I then report or carry out on site. But the rover should also be able to operate autonomously. Ideally, it will be equipped with many measuring instruments that provide us with a lot of information.
Robots, cameras, probes. The moon is measured to the very last corner. But does this mean we know more about it than previous generations? Even back in the Stone Age, people construct gigantic calendars under the open skies. The moon marks the change between day and night. Babylonian astronomers calculate its cycle of 29 days. They brought us the month as a unit of time. But what could the people of the Bronze Age in today's central Germany know about the moon? In 1999, the sky disk was found here on the Mittelberg Plateau near Nebra in Saxony-Anhalt. At first, nobody guessed just how important this chance discovery was.
It was highly unlikely that there would be such a thing in Europe. We never thought of it. But that's always the way with major discoveries in the world. No one could have imagined Earthsea. No one could have imagined the sky disk. These are really things that appear like a comet out of nowhere and absolutely astound us all.
The State Museum of Prehistory in Halle an der Saale possesses the oldest graphical representation of cosmic phenomena. The Nebra sky disk has been classified by UNESCO as a cultural heritage of humanity. But what does it show? A bronze disk with sun, moon, and stars? Is it easy to understand, or is there a complex knowledge of the sky behind it? 1,600 years before Christ, was there a particularly well-informed group of people who already used an astronomical instrument living in southern Saxony-Anhalt? What could a society that did not yet know scripture know about the moon? The discovery of Nebra threw Harold Meller's understanding of the Bronze Age into turmoil.
Above all, the special thing about the sky disk is that it's completely matter-of-fact. It's comprehensible to us modern people. It's as matter-of-fact as a traffic sign. It informs in the most reduced way possible.
At first, however, it is unclear what it wants to communicate in reduced form. For 4 years, scientists tried to crack the secret code. And they first discovered that 3,600 years ago, people were already trading with the whole of Europe.
And now we have it here as a fantastic artifact of great value. The copper comes from the Alps, the gold from Cornwall, and they forged this fantastic memogram out of it.
So was the Nebra sky disk a valuable cultic object with which a tribal prince once adorned himself?
Put simply, we see sun, moon and stars. Every child would say this is what you see at first glance. But if you take a closer look, you see, aha, it's the crescent moon, and maybe the full moon or the sun, or could it be moon and sun at the same time? In between is a 7-star constellation, which is the Pleiades.
The Pleiades are mentioned in different cultures as the 7 calendar stars. Whenever the crescent moon looks exactly the same in relation to the Pleiades as on the sky disk, leap days must be inserted to bring the shorter lunar year in line with the solar year. The creators of this disk also only had to compare the moon in spring and fall, when the calendar stars rose, with the golden image on the disk to know when it was time to sow or harvest. They had created a unique sky clock.
What's particularly exciting about the sky disk is that you probably need knowledge from the Orient. You can deduce the rules represented on the sky disk by observing the metonic cycle of the moon yourself. But in a pre-literate culture, you'd have to observe the moon for 40 or 60 years to find that out. And this without the sky being covered, i.e. without clouds. This is possible here because there is little cloud cover in central Germany, but it's unlikely. They probably became familiar with the rules on a long journey to the Near East, to Byblos in Lebanon, to what's now Iraq or a similar place.
The Islamic calendar is a pure lunar calendar. Ramadan, the month of fasting, begins also with the appearance of the crescent moon. However, as this is difficult to recognize even for trained observers, Ahmed Rash was given the task of his life.
We were asked by Saudi Arabia in 2005, 2006, whether it would be possible to develop a center for moon observation and astronomy in Mecca. What it could look like and what it would involve.
A moon observation center at dizzying heights. In the middle of the holy district of Mecca, the birthplace of the Prophet Muhammad. The observation center is to state the exact beginning of Ramadan for all Muslims, because Ramadan, like the Christian Easter, travels with the moon through the year, 11 days further forward every year. An observatory in the crescent moon on a high-rise building 600 meters above the ground, and other challenges came on top of this.
In the Guinness Book of Records, the tower clock is now mentioned as the clock with the world's largest dial. In total, we have over 30 world records to report. This is the building with the highest observatory in the world.
For the observatory in the crescent moon, the moon telescope had to be built in such a way that it compensates for the oscillations of the high-rise building. Inside the tower too, Saudi Arabia wants to connect to the time of its great astronomers, with the moon at the center of the research. Like many other things, it was imported.
When it comes to technical facilities that are just special, and therefore have to meet unique requirements, You're sure to find someone here in southern Germany who'll deliver something that works better than perhaps anywhere else. And you have them all right on your doorstep. It's all here from the area. The Swabians.
A family business in Gomaringen was commissioned to produce the world's most accurate 3D model for the Mecca clock tower, a model of the moon.
I'm a carpenter, a master carpenter, and we usually make furniture in the workshop.
But the master carpenter also has a weakness for model building of all kinds.
And from this, a small branch developed in our company, which produces models for museums and similar institutions.
Now Joachim Flug was to make the most accurate 3D moon in the world. Every crater, every mountain, and every valley true to scale, based on the latest data from NASA.
We have been commissioned to make 2 moons for the Mecca clock tower, the 3rd tallest building in the world. It has 2 museums. One is open to the public, while the other is not. And the moon was hung and presented in these rooms.
In 2009, the NASA moon probe Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter was launched. The aim of the mission, the mapping of the entire lunar surface in high resolution. And a Swabian family business is suddenly very close to the project. Receives the latest data from NASA with every lunar orbit. But how do you feed a joineries milling program with data from a lunar probe? Joachim Flug's son solves the problem in theory with a doctoral thesis. But that was not the only obstacle.
Well, the big challenge in the beginning was the data, because when we got the order, the LRO satellite had only been in orbit for about 3 or 4 years, and the data was not yet completely available. And it was basically a race against time for the data to be collected and released by NASA. And we actually already had the order and were behind schedule to convert this data into milling results as well.
But then the copy of the moon was made on Earth. A twin made of plastic. All of its mountains, seas, bays, and lakes, true to scale and divided up into 32 individual parts.
The model had to be divided into segments. A, because we couldn't make it bigger on the milling machine, and B, because it had to be transported in an elevator afterwards, and we knew the dimensions of this. We then chose the shape of an icosahedron. The icosahedron stump is like the classic football, consisting of 20 hexagons and 12 pentagons. And we first made these segments in modeling plastic, and then molded them into glass fiber, transformed them into carbon fiber, so that we had handy and transportable segments that did not make the ball too heavy.
Joachim Flug had an extra model of the moon made for NASA. They will collect their moon model on the occasion of the 50th anniversary of the Apollo landing. Joachim Flug can remember this very well.
I was sitting in front of the TV as a teenager when the Apollo landed, when Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the moon as shadowy figures on the black and white TV. And now we were practically getting data directly from NASA. We downloaded them. And this within a time span of just 50 years. That's what really made me tingle and get excited about it, that we made such a big leap in development within such a short time, so that we as carpenters can convert these data into a 3D form.
Long before the first astronaut set foot in the lunar dust, more fantastic creatures had left their marks there. Moon geese. Around 1620, the English bishop Francis Godwin wrote one of the first works of science fiction, The Man in the Moon. In the novel, he depicts the voyage of Domingo Gonzalez, who uses moon geese to travel to our cosmic neighbor. At the time, scientists really believed that migratory birds spent the winter on the moon. Today, ornithologists know for a fact that they don't. But how do the animals navigate so precisely to the south and back? This remained a mystery that ornithologists are now trying to solve. Baikonur. It was from here in 1961 that Yuri Gagarin became the first human to fly into space. In 2018, preparations are underway here for the launch of an animal observation project that will also take biology into a new dimension. Initiator of the Icarus project, Martin Wikelski, director of the Max Planck Institute.
Today is the end of a long march. We started 16 years ago with an idea, and I mean that's why we chose the name. We thought, everybody thought this is crazy. It won't fly, and we said it will fly.
In February 2018, the launch of Icarus on the spaceport in Baikonur is imminent. A rocket will bring the huge receiving antenna to the International Space Station. Icarus is the high-tech version of a field of research that goes back a long way.
We already can track some large animals, but what we need is a system that tracks small animals. And not only track them, not only give us a GPS position, but also tell us what the animals are doing.
Icarus launches, and the international team celebrates. From 2019, hundreds and thousands of animals will be able to be observed simultaneously in almost every corner of the world. The antenna has already been successfully mounted onto the outer shell of the ISS in an outdoor mission taking almost 7 hours. During the test phase, the antenna provides data with initial indications about the global swarm behavior of animals. In a next step, Martin Wikelski wants to equip thousands of animal species with small transmitters.
What's really special is that this is easily produced. There's a solar panel, a circuit board, and a battery, and this will be stripped on animals like a backpack.
As soon as the ISS is in orbit above the animals, the transmitter is activated and sends the motion data up to the ISS.
And in our mind, it will revolutionize biology.
Acting as living measuring stations, the animals could also provide information on wind and weather, temperature, ozone, or carbon dioxide content, says the researcher. In this way, they could help to improve climate models or even predict natural disasters. What Wikelski has in mind is a network of living sensors, an internet of animals, as it were.
The new approach of Icarus is that it's an optimized system for tracking animals. It gives us a knowledge of exactly what the animal is doing. Is the animal sick? Does the animal have a problem? Does it interact with other individuals? The insights from that are, I think, unbelievable. There's so much that animals can tell us.
It's a long journey for the data, all the way to the ISS and back. But the scientists hope that evaluating it will enable them to better understand life on our planet. The Kennedy Space Center, NASA's spaceport in Florida. Starting in December 1968, all manned spaceflights of the Apollo mission launched from here. The relics of the first moonwalkers can still be admired here. And now the next moon mission is in the planning.
The Apollo technology may seem outdated from today's point of view, but the theory is still valid. This means that we have to make a similar landing approach, we have similar difficulties to overcome. But today, we have a lot more technology on board, and this technology offers us security.
Experts on space travel today have other goals in sight than the Apollo planners back then. On the next moon mission, astronauts will not only be coming to walk on the moon, next time they are coming to stay. Work is already underway on the lunar village of the future.
For us, the challenge is not so much to land there just to be there. We want to land there to set up a station to carry out long-term research.
The South Pole would be a possible location for the planned station, one of the coldest places in the solar system.
So far, the astronauts have never been to the South Pole or the South Pole region of the Moon. This is a very exciting area because the Moon's oldest crater can be found there. It's very exciting for the scientists to explore this area. In addition, huge deposits of water ice are thought to be there, but this still has to be proven. And descending into these deep craters, recovering this water ice and then using it, that will be the greatest challenge for manned spaceflight.
50 years after the first Apollo landing, the Moon is back in the spotlight. Its fascinating story continues. The Moon. Ruler of the world's seas. For millions of years now, it has been steering the oceans. Every 12 hours, over 1 billion cubic kilometers of water move across our planet in time with the tides. The ebb and flow of the tide are the clearest signs of the enormous pull of the Moon. But does it therefore also guide our behavior? To this day, the vast majority of people are convinced that the Moon influences us. How we sleep, how we love, when our children are born. Is the mysterious attraction more than a romantic feeling? Is there a secret bond between man and Moon?
Everyone in the world, whether they live in Papua New Guinea or in the middle of Cologne, they all have the same moon.
What you can learn from the Moon is that things change all the time.
That the Moon has this power over the thoughts, the imagination of man over such a long period of time, I find that quite amazing. The Moon here is a spectacle, there's no other word for it.
Our search for the magic of the Moon begins in Paris. Not far from the Louvre, we find Jelani Machi, one of the city's top hairdressers. The opening hours of a salon depend on the moonrise at full moon, and that is not expected to happen before midnight today. For almost 40 years now, he's been cutting hair on a full moon. And this despite the fact he was not initially convinced of the influence of the Earth's satellites on hair.
I had the idea because my grandparents and also my parents always talked about the full moon and explained to me that it's best to cut hair on the night of a full moon. To be honest, I never took it seriously. All I said to myself was, just another superstition.
But when he receives the first requests from customers, Jelani Machi begins to open his salon on full moon nights, and the skeptic became a fan of the Moon.
When I cut hair on a full moon evening, the atmosphere is different. I would even say that the clientele is different from that during the day. Strangely enough, people aren't in such a hurry. They come and spend the whole night with me. During the day, everyone is rushing because of work, time pressure, appointments, but the customers in the evening are completely different.
Not only is working more pleasant, Machi found over the years that cutting the hair on a full moon actually makes it grow faster and stronger.
Here, the hair doesn't respond at all. It's completely damaged, brittle. And here, this whole section, the hair is virtually non-existent here. It's dead. So, in order to revive it, I'm forced, with your permission, to cut off at least this section, to bring it back to life.
However, Machi's experience has shown that our satellite can only unfold its full effect on the hair under the open skies. So it's off outside at midnight, even if a thunderstorm is approaching on this night, in place of a view of the full moon. The hairdresser faces up to the wet element. Does the hair really grow back stronger and faster? Machi's customers swear by it. And even when the shower turns into a downpour, the master keeps his scissors chopping. This is an experience in any case. Why do so many people firmly believe in lunar influences on psychological and biological processes? Is the moon perhaps not only the ruler of the tides, but also of the plant world? A Swiss professor is certain. The tree is the link between man and moon.
When man looks out into the plant world, he actually encounters a being that is absolutely outstanding, and that is the tree.
Trees can live for a very long time. The oldest is probably 9,500 years old.
In terms of time and space, it is larger than man in these two regards. And to me, trees are something like the people of the plant world.
Does this mean that trees guard a cosmic secret?
The tree actually plays a central role in all cultures. This is the axis of the world between earth and sky. But now, with our research, we're realizing that it's much more specific than we imagine. These are not only symbols or archetypes, there is real interaction. The trees pulsate not only with the Earth, root system, climate, but also with the cosmic events, with these rhythms.
Are the lunar cycles related to the growth of trees? How do some of them manage to survive such unbelievable periods of time undamaged? How can we use this knowledge? In Berchtesgaden, in the Saghäusel, the moon has determined for generations when the trees are felled. When a cycle is over, father and son set off into the forest.
Throughout the whole winter, there are only 9 days on which you can harvest wood for building timber. And today is such a day, a beautiful day.
If the wood is to survive for centuries, it is only felled here if the moon is not visible in the sky, on a new moon. Today is the last day of the year on which they will drive out into their forest on the mountain. Their great-grandfathers planted the spruces they plan to fell today. It takes around 140 years for a spruce to grow this tall. The felling process is much faster. It only takes 10 minutes.
Once you've started with it, you develop an inner sense of how nature works, and you no longer think about whether you should do it on another day. But you know that today is the right day, and then I do it. 15 years ago, we took all the moon wood from this forest to construct the roof structure for our house, exactly at the right juncture. And guess what? We haven't used a drop of paint or wood preservative on the whole house. It's just wonderful. You can't do it any better.
People from the wood industry used to regard them as eccentric with their lunar wood. But word that it is more durable, entirely without the use of chemicals, is slowly spreading.
Hopefully we'll be able to leave that esoteric label behind, but I think we can live with that, can't we?
You only have to work hand in hand with the moon, then you get wood for eternity. That has always been the motto here in the Saghäusel. They don't need scientific proof for that. Lately, the Geislingers have started receiving orders from all over Germany. They recently delivered their wood for the construction of the organ in the Elbe Philharmonic Hall in Hamburg. It hasn't changed the way they work. They simply sell good wood, even if they now call it lunar wood, in keeping with the spirit of the times. The Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, one of the largest education and research centres in Switzerland, is not only breaking new ground in an architectural sense. Professor Ernst Zürcher could be enjoying his retirement, but the universities invite him to come and talk about the influence of the moon on wood. Not only did the scientist discover that people in earlier cultures took the cycles of the Earth's satellite into account when processing wood, he was also able to detect green tides in the trees.
As well as the sun, the moon, of course, also has a huge effect on all biological processes. This is best visible in plants. Rediscovering this is very important in physiology, in germination, in the properties of wood. After all, it's a living material. And we have now approached this from a scientific perspective and been able to show that it has measurable, provable, statistically analyzable effects on the living world.
The Swiss scientist was able to prove that trees pulse in time with the moon. Their trunk diameter increases and decreases every 12 hours in synchronization with the ebb and flow of the tide. What would nature, the Earth, or man be without the moon? For Pascal Descamps, astronomer at the Paris Observatory, these are precisely the exciting questions.
The moon is very important for the Earth and its inhabitants. It has also played a very important role in the past. You could say that without the moon, there would be no life on Earth.
4.5 billion years ago, the Earth was still racing around in orbit. Scientists estimate that a day lasted only 2 to 3 hours back then. Life probably would not have developed under these conditions.
So the Earth was turning very quickly, with a moon that was still very close to the Earth. The tidal forces were very strong, i.e. the tides flooded the continents and retreated. That was quite devastating. Fortunately, however, the moon began to slowly distance itself from the Earth in this phase. The tidal forces slowly decreased, everything calmed down, and life could gradually emerge. So the moon is indeed indispensable. It was, and it still is until today.
The Earth and the moon. Only together did they form the stable pair with which life on Earth began. Without the moon, we would not have the 4 seasons which in their even change enabled the beginning of evolution. The moon, our clock that sets the rhythm for life.
I have many colleagues, musicians, who like to work and make music at night, because the whole atmosphere at night is somewhat mystical, a bit not from this world. And that's when you come up with some ideas. When the moon is a light source and serves as your guide in a dark night, and that is a wonderful inspiration.
Dann ist es eine wunderbare Inspiration.
The port of Hamburg. The sun is shining, so it's out onto the water. Or what does the horoscope say? People have always tried to use celestial bodies to interpret their fate. As well as the stars and the sun, the moon is often of key interest for astrologers. For Manuela Rea, it tells people what they need.
The history of astrology is very long and has, of course, passed through different eras in which different facets of astrology were particularly important. And today, the connection with psychology is a key topic, and also the great gift of a very nice, differentiated anthropology, which is much more precise than all other systems.
Many people are familiar with the 12 signs of the zodiac. The sun takes almost 30 days to traverse a constellation. The moon is faster. It changes signs every 2.5 days. The 4 phases of the moon's orbit and the 12 constellations formed a celestial clock for astrologers. A horoscope from which it is not only possible to read what conducive or inhibitory factors the future holds in stores for one's intentions. For astrologers, the moon is like a compass that reveals what is good for day after day.
This means that the mood changes every 2.5 days. Yes, you can observe this. Just take a look at your circle of friends and at how people behave when the moon is in Leo, or when it is in Taurus or Pisces. In Pisces, they might be very emotional, very sensitive, and you have to handle them with kid gloves. And when they're in Leo, you might feel like going out, hitting the town, going dancing with your girlfriend or whatever. But you can observe it yourself because it changes completely every 2.5 days.
For Manuela Rea, the Earth's satellite reflects our emotional world. It is her advisor and teacher, especially in situations of crisis.
What you can definitely learn from the moon is that things change all the time, and that everything repeats itself, that there is an ever-returning cycle that simply reflects life and what surrounds us. And through this, you can also develop a certain kind of serenity for your own life.
But can the influence of the moon on us humans also be scientifically proven? In the animal world, especially on the coasts, it is only the tides that make it possible for some species to reproduce on land and ensure their survival. For others, the light of the full moon is the signal to mate or lay eggs. Take the largest living turtle, for example. The leatherback turtle only comes onto the beach to lay its eggs at springtide and full moon. After the work is done, the moon shows her the way back to the sea. At the Great Barrier Reef off the Australian coast, thousands of corals release their gametes into the water every spring, as if on command. Like an underwater blizzard, all coral species here reproduce following the rhythm of the lunar cycles. To this day, no one knows why this is. It has now been scientifically proven for a South Pacific worm that the moon is the clock of fertility. On Samoa, the islanders celebrate a festival in fall called Tatalega, the Night of the Worms. In a single night, regularly at the time of the last quarter of the moon in October or November, millions of palolo males and females, shimmering in shades of green and brown, separate from the ends of their bodies, which are loaded with eggs and sperm. They move towards the moonlight, to the surface of the sea to unite there. The islanders are then ready and waiting with nets, baskets and lamps to fish the caviar of the South Seas out of the ocean. Biologists have shown that the worm's reproduction cycle is closely linked to the change in the phase of the moon. But what about us humans? Does our sexuality tick in time with the lunar clock? Does the full moon really make us more sensual? There is no doubt that the moon possesses an erotic radiance. Is the seductive moon male or female? Anne Marchand has tried to trace the identity of the moon, but it even changes genders in the languages. In the Romance languages, it's called la lune, la luna, and is female, while in German, der Mond is male.
In general, it is impossible to say whether the moon is male or female, depending on the myth or the mythology of the respective people. It can be either male or female, or also a little of both.
The Romans worshipped Luna, the goddess of the night, while the Greeks had a whole range of moon goddesses. Selene, Artemis, Danae. In the north, there was the moon god, Mani.
In Europe, the oldest stories belong to Greek mythology. Selene is female. Since she is a being of the sky, the air, she's very unstable. And she has a weakness for good-looking young men.
The moon goddesses were also revered for their influence on human fertility. Does the belief that more children are born on a full moon trace back to this myth? Dorothee Struck is a gynecologist and lives by the sea. She's sure that certain combinations of moon phase and water level are the starting signal for births. The moon has already caused her particularly strenuous working days.
So that was sometime in the 90s, the only night with 13 children. I didn't know if I was coming or going, and how many boys or girls had been born. I just kept running from one delivery room to the next, followed by 2 midwives. There are certain lunar constellations when there is quite a lot going on, and with others not.
Many people are convinced that more children are born on a full moon. According to one theory, microtides could have an effect upon the unborn child floating in the amniotic sac and trigger birth. Despite large-scale studies, science has not yet been able to establish a connection between the full moon and an increase in births. We asked Dorothee Struck, an Orthodox medical practitioner.
We know that in societies without light pollution, in other words, societies not bothered by light at night, women in general always menstruate to a new moon and then ovulate 14 days later at full moon. And exactly 9 cycles later, again at full moon, many children are born.
Testimonies of ancient cultures report a synchronicity of female cycles, according to which all women are said to have been ready to conceive at the same time during a full moon. A lunar cycle lasts 29.5 days, and is thus about the same length as the cycle of many women. A coincidence? A psychiatrist from Prague claims to have discovered that every woman has an individual lunar phase cycle that begins with her birth and continues with absolute precision throughout her childbearing years. This lunar phase cycle can shift in modern women due to light pollution and stress. They then even have 2 cycles. Sometimes, therefore, the most fertile days are during the period. Women who want to conceive can now have their lunar cycle calculated in gynecologist practices.
We don't always have to manage absolutely everything. The women with a desire to conceive are often under pressure anyway. But I can see what I can transfer into everyday life, what can help me to reconnect with nature, and also find this belief that our female nature is able to swing us back into cycles, and our body can repair a lot.
If you ask science, the long-distance effect of the moon can hardly be proved. But 88% of Germans believe in it. So, what is true about the magical power of the moon? We pose this question to moon fans in front of the Hamburg Planetarium, who meet here in summer for the full moon open air with music.
Always at full moon. We live only 500 meters away from here. We come here to the meadow with a small picnic. Of course, we have a drink and listen to music. The atmosphere is amazing.
But does it influence how we sleep? How we love and live?
Well, I have 2 children, and one child was born one day before the full moon, and my daughter was born exactly on a full moon. And well, yes, they say that most children are born at that time, and with me it was true. And that is my connection to the moon.
Everyone seems to have their own personal relationship with it. Lovers and moon worshippers. And those who can't sleep anyway. But who wants to sleep on a night like this and with such a view? Many scientists have already tried to fathom the great insomnia. A Swiss chronobiologist took the matter in hand.
We were in a full moon bar in Basel, and it's really only open on a full moon. And then we asked ourselves the question, why does the moon hold so much fascination for people? Why do many people complain about disturbed sleep during a full moon?
From that point on, Christian Kajochen couldn't stop thinking about the moon. He wanted to know more. Do we humans have an inner lunar clock that controls our sleep? Do we really sleep worse on a full moon? If so, why could this never be proven? Or is it just the bright light from the moon that disturbs our sleep? The chronobiologist invited 30 test subjects to the University of Basel's sleep laboratory. They were not told that the test to be conducted focused on the influence of the moon on their sleep behavior.
You have a problem when you tell people, we're going to examine the moon now, we're conducting a moon study. Then that actually already influences their results. We have to somehow sell it under a different guise, so to speak, but in a manner that's ethically justifiable.
A so-called blind study was therefore conducted, and to rule out the factor that only the bright light from the moon makes people sleep worse, the study participants had to spend the night in the laboratory.
We have laboratories, so we're in one of those here, where we basically shield people from the environment. So environmental factors like noise, temperature fluctuations, light. So they didn't see moonlight either, or social contacts. They're completely shielded here. The goal is to really measure endogenous rhythms, i.e. the rhythms that arise in the body.
The scientists did not believe that they would see a measurable effect of the moon on their test sleepers. This is how they formulated their theory. After all, what could humans notice without the direct shine of the moonlight? The result was all the more surprising.
We only recruited sleepers with a sleep efficiency of 95%, i.e., who sleep virtually the whole time they're in bed. But even with these people, we saw that during the full moon phases, they needed 5 minutes longer to fall asleep, had 30% less deep sleep, and also that the sleep efficiency was significantly lower by certain percentage points than with people who happened to be with us during the new moon phase. We hesitated to publish these data for a long time because you always get some weird looks. You're suddenly a lunatic, or maybe you're placed in the esoteric box. And I don't know what's behind it, but I am even more fascinated by it than before the study, I have to say.
Johanna Paunger turned her fascination with the moon into her profession. The trained bank clerk tries to live in harmony with the rhythms of the moon and passes on her knowledge to other people. Today, she is out collecting herbs with a beginner group.
You know what it's about, the influence of the moon. That you can't do certain things just any time, such as picking and drying. We know that St. John's wort oil is good for the nerves or for burns, and it's red. St. John's wort oil is only curative in the waxing moon, and if you fill it then and leave it out in the sun, then you have it for years. It doesn't get rancid. You have a healing power that really helps.
Johanna Paunger grew up on a farm in Tyrol. Her grandfather did everything according to the lunar calendar, her mother too. She made the knowledge of the right time into her mission. She writes books and gives seminars. It's all very easy for her, for example, when cooking jam.
So I only make jam when the moon is right, because that's the only time it's worth putting the effort in. First of all, it lasts longer, whereby that's not always the case with us because we like to eat our own jam. But it's important for who's starting. You don't have to remember that much. So just never do it when the calendar is in Virgo. It doesn't matter if you're making jam or something else, it'll go moldy. So a fruit day like today, and then with a waning moon, that's ideal.
The Tyrolean has rewritten the old farmer's rules. Her lunar calendar has been translated into 8 languages and sold around 2 million times. The moon tells her the right time to wash her clothes, go to the doctor, or harvest apples. Nowadays, the mother of 3 children advises farmers, wine growers, and gardeners.
Well, the moon has become more than just a companion for me now. It is as much a part of my life as the air I breathe. I couldn't imagine it any other way. But always from the perspective that we use the moon, but we do not exploit anything.
We visit the oldest university observatory in the world, Oude Sterrenwacht, in Leiden in the Netherlands. Harald Hiesinger and Marcus de Landgraf are planning the next mission to the moon for the European Space Agency, ESA. Thanks to modern probes orbiting the Earth's satellite, the 2 moon enthusiasts are familiar with every crater. Before astronomers began to observe the moon with binoculars and telescopes, people were already using the changeable moon as a sky clock.
Jetzt haben wir es sehr gut. Schau du mal rein. In
the past, it was of course also important to keep certain appointments. And back then, there were no precise cell phone calendars, so we needed a kind of clock. The moon is a great object for this, because it comes back into the same phase regularly every 29 days. And that, of course, helps in everyday life when you have to answer questions like, when do I have to sow the seeds? When can I harvest? When does the cow have to go out to pasture? And I speculate that that's why a certain rule of thumb arose, that certain things should be done in a certain phase of the moon, or that certain things should be done in a certain phase of the moon relative to the vernal equinox, for example. And it's actually nice to have a cultural connection to a celestial object.
Eigentlich ist das sehr schön, dass wir so eine kulturelle Verbindung haben zu einem Himmelsobjekt. Hier ist der Jupitermond.
The observation of the moon has constantly changed our culture. In the 17th century, the moon was regarded as divine and perfect, as a flawless disk, until Galileo Galilei examined it through binoculars. In the blurred patterns of shadow and light, the Florentine researcher was the first to recognize the true face of our closest cosmic neighbor.
The moon
was the only object where structures could be seen, and with the first telescopes one could already see mountains and valleys, very similar structures to here on Earth. This led to the consideration that this is not an object that belongs to the divine sphere, but it's actually a part of nature. And this is a basic idea of the Renaissance, that nature actually occupies its own space, and that not only the human sphere and the divine sphere exist.
In 1610, Galileo Galilei published his observations in the Messenger of the Stars, shaking up the prevailing worldview. In it, he claims that the moon is a second Earth, and that the sun is the core around which all the planets revolve. The Church considered Galileo's findings heresy. Above all, the heliocentric worldview, with the sun in the center, contradicts the Bible. Because the Bible says,
Then Joshua spoke to the Lord, and he said, Sun, be at rest over Gibeon, and you, O moon, in the valley of Ajalon. And the sun was at rest, and the moon kept its place.
And as the Bible was not allowed to be mistaken, the Holy Inquisition forced Galileo Galilei to revoke his theories. Vatican astronomers have been studying space for centuries. The Jesuit father Juan Casanovas also conducted research at the Specula Vaticana, the papal observatory, until his death. It took over 100 years for the Church to acknowledge its mistake, and over 300 years until Galileo Galilei was rehabilitated in 1992. This was particularly bitter for the Vatican astronomer.
The theologians have waited a long time to reinterpret this passage of Scripture. It was we astronomers who forced them to do so. And the theologians took a very long time to admit their mistake. That's my opinion. The theologians were not interested in the problem we astronomers had. They didn't really care whether the sun rotated around the Earth or vice versa.
Sono le orbite, non è interessante per niente. Questa è la mia tesi.
The Vatican Observatory was founded by Pope Gregory XIII in order to reach an agreeable date for Easter with a calendar reform. The date depends on the beginning of spring and the first full moon of spring. It could not be precisely calculated with the Julian calendar previously used. The Gregorian calendar was therefore introduced, which is still the most widely used calendar worldwide. The Catholic Church no longer has the sole power to interpret heaven and earth. Galilei continued his research. A bird's feather falls more slowly than an iron hammer. Since Aristotle, weight has been the decisive factor for the velocity of fall. The researcher has his doubts. From his experiments, he concludes that all objects fall at the same speed, regardless of material and mass. In a vacuum, even a feather and a hammer should touch the ground at the same time. In 1971, the Apollo 15 astronaut David Scott used his stay on the moon for a special homage to Galileo Galilei.
Beautiful picture, Dave. Well, in my left hand I have a feather. In my right hand a hammer. And I guess one of the reasons we got here today was because of a gentleman named Galileo a long time ago who made a rather significant discovery about falling objects in gravity fields. And we thought that where would be a better place to confirm his findings than on the moon. And so we thought we'd try it here for you. The feather happens to be appropriately a falcon feather for our falcon. And I'll drop the two of them here, and hopefully they'll hit the ground at the same time. How about that?
Galileo's view of the world has become generally accepted. People have long since landed on the moon, but the celestial body was able to keep one secret for a very long time.
The early astronomers were, of course, extremely fascinated by the fact that the moon always shows the same side, which did not seem to change from Earth. That's different from other objects. Jupiter moons rotate, and that already occupied the early astronomers a lot back then, and also contributed to the moon myth, because one could speculate what's on the other side.
The changeable moon, it only shows us one side. What is it hiding behind its back? The fantasies of science fiction authors range from aliens to Nazis hiding there. Anne Marchand is an ethnologist, and she's also fascinated by the dark stories about the moon, which can conjure up evil in us.
There is also this dark aspect of the moon. Because in mythology, all good things must also have a negative side. And often the person who brings life is the person who brings death. In Egypt, the moon begins as a fearsome god, a god of death.
North of Luxor, in Upper Egypt, the moon shows other facets. The Temple of Dendera can be found here, a sanctuary which represents the cosmos, like a stone book holding secret knowledge about the sky's spheres. A ceiling frieze inside explains the phases of the moon. A staircase with 14 steps symbolizes the 14 days of the waxing moon. They are climbed by 14 gods. Upon reaching the top, they see the full moon.
And here we find again the Egyptian idea of eternal life, that is to say, of living on in the hereafter. Here we find the constantly renewing moon.
Moon, death, recurrence. Is that why the moon features in every horror story? In legends and fairy tales, wolves howl at the full moon. Countless myths are linked to the dark side of the moon. At one moment, it is still a guarantor for romance, then it's a cue for the appearance of evil.
And then the moon is also a creature of the night. But for us humans, who are not made to see at night, for us, every sound, every light, everything that happens in the dark takes on disturbing proportions.
The lunatics is an English term for those who have been struck by lunar insanity. They strike when the moon shines round and pale. This is when people turn into werewolves or mutate into bloodsuckers. Everyone is a moon and has a dark side that he does not show to anyone, wrote Mark Twain. Novels, films, and music have puzzled over what dark aspects of human existence this could be. The dark side of the moon has also left numerous works of art to future generations. The cultural scientist Bernd Brunner regrets that science revealed the hidden side of the moon a long time ago.
The dark side of the moon. This is, of course, basically a mistaken idea, because it's not dark at all. It's only dark for us, because we mostly, well, we see parts of it sometimes. But it's as bright as the other side. Only that we would first have to have the possibility to travel behind the moon. That was sometime in the late 50s, that you could become convinced that it's not dark there at all.
The race to the moon begins with a head start for the Russians. In January 1959, their Luna 1 was launched. With Luna 2, the first spacecraft reached the moon, and Luna 3 circumnavigated it and sent the first photos of its remote side. But the Americans are catching up. On December 24, 1968, 3 astronauts on board the Apollo 8 circumnavigate the moon for the first time. They send the first man-made images of the back of the celestial body back to Earth. On the last test flight before the moon landing, something strange happened to the crew of Apollo 10. The astronauts are in almost constant radio contact with the control center in Houston.
Houston, 3.5 minutes. You're still looking good. Your predicted cutoff is right on the nominal.
At 3 hours, 11 minutes into the mission, the distance from Earth, 3,140 nautical miles. Yes.
Having arrived on the side facing away from the Earth, the landing capsule separates from the mothership for the first time. Then the signal to Earth breaks off. The moon is blocking the way for radio waves. Conversations on board are still being recorded. NASA releases the transcriptions of these tapes in 2008, and finally the tapes themselves. At first, it's all irrelevant chatter, but then something strange can be heard.
That music even sounds outer spacey, doesn't it? You hear that? That whistling sound?
For Commander John Young, it sounds like outer space music, and Eugene Cernan answers in the landing module.
Yeah, it sounds like, outer space-type music.
The astronauts keep the inexplicable phenomenon to themselves. What did they hear? Was it just radio waves crossing, or an electromagnetic buzzing from the depths of the universe? When the Earth is back in sight,
Apollo 10, this is Houston. We have radio contact again.
the sound is gone. The late publication of the tape recordings and the silence of the astronauts fed the rumors about extraterrestrials. Since time immemorial, the moon has been our nocturnal companion, near and yet so unattainably far away. Its greatest enchantment goes back to the romantics of the 19th century. They made Luna, the goddess of the night, their muse. The director of the Kroninger Museum has been hot on the seducer's heels for quite some time, and is always finding new treasures of lunar infatuation.
And of course, it's noticeable that the Romantics very often painted night views, much more than the others. And then the question arises again, why? And this also applies to music or poetry. The moon is sung about, described and painted, perhaps on the search for a new image of nature. For us today, in the 21st century, one thinks, well, in 1820, nature was still clean. But in the consciousness of people at the time, industrialization had already begun. The cities were full, one began to see nature, and with it also the light of nature, daylight, nightlight, in a new and better way.
The moon, the sun of the night, its light has fascinated artists. And no one has focused their work as much on the moon as Caspar David Friedrich. For him, the moon was a mirror of the human soul.
Friedrich's pictures of the moon, or actually of people looking at the moon, are really key pictures. The moon is the theme, but actually the contemplation of the moon. Yes, that person is standing, reflecting in nature, otherwise sees nothing, and is simply looking at a light phenomenon, which is actually complete nonsense, uninteresting. Every day the moon rises and falls, why should we look at it? But no, there's observation, looking, contemplating, standing devoutly looking at the moon. That was interesting for Friedrich. He probably interpreted creation into it. Nature is God's creation, and everything in nature, from a blade of grass to the moon, is proof of God. You just have to look properly.
Luna unfolds her most beautiful glow in the works of the painters, but she also has a wide range of colours herself. The moon is not just grey. Sometimes it presents itself in honey yellow, then in strawberry red, or even blood red. And when there is a lot of dust particles in the atmosphere, it can turn blue. But blue moon actually means a second full moon in a month. The moon has lost nothing of its attraction, especially when it promises a full eclipse. Like on July 27, 2018, when hobby astronomers like here in the Lüneburger Heide and many other parts of the world look for the best places to watch the rare spectacle in the sky. When the lunar eclipse begins, the moon dips into the shadow of the Earth. This happens when the sun, moon, and Earth are almost in a line. Some sunlight still reaches the moon, and so it remains just slightly visible as a so-called blood moon. Slowly, it steps out of the shadow of the Earth and begins to shine. For 103 minutes, it was once again the focus of enthusiasm for people around the world, not something that can be copied easily.
I think the moon fascinates everyone differently in its own way. Some as a scientist, others as a religious symbol, and others again as a light phenomenon. But these possibilities that the moon offers you, or the people of different cultures, this is incredibly interesting.
Maybe that's why people all over the world celebrate the moon to such a great extent. In India, the Festival of Colours takes place on the first full moon day of February. The message? The triumph of good over evil. At the Thai Festival of Lights, on a full moon, all the anger and resentment that has accumulated over a year is packed onto a raft and left to float away. The passion between man and moon is constantly finding new highlights. It's like a secret bond that seems to renew itself in time with the moon. As soon as the sun sank, the Earth fell into darkness and only the moon lit up the night. It has long since ceased to be the only light in the night sky. That was before man invented electric light. In our illuminated world, the moon almost seems a bit like a relic from ancient times. Is it still a scientific challenge at all?
If I had the choice, I'd definitely land on the moon or on Mars.
I'd like to go to the moon, but I'd also like a ticket for the return flight.
My intention is to build up a permanent base station on the moon.
In our present form, we're completely unsuited to a stay in space or on the moon. It's a place that's completely hostile to life.
I imagine it's great when you're standing on Earth looking at the moon and you know there are people there.
On July 16, 1969, the sun rises over Florida's swamps, as it does every day. Where normally only snakes and crocodiles meet, the greatest technical adventure of modern times is about to take place.
At 6:32 a.m., 3 hours before launch, on pad 39A, Armstrong and Aldrin walked on the surface of the Earth. Their next steps would be on the moon.
1 million people alone around the shuttle station are eagerly following the astronauts' final hours before their flight to the moon. The atmosphere is a cross between a tent camp and folk festival. Hippies, diplomats, curious people from all over the world want to experience the historical moment. Outside, the colourful hustle and bustle. Inside, tension and absolute concentration.
The day began for the astronauts. Neil Armstrong, Commander Apollo 11. Edwin Buzz Aldrin, Lunar Module Pilot. Michael Collins, Command Module Pilot.
Can the flight they've all been working towards together for years succeed?
55 seconds and counting. Neil Armstrong reported back when he received the good wishes. Thank you very much. We know it will be a good flight.
Sergeant, go. Capcom, we're go for undocking. Negative flight. I believe the crew reported it. We got a man.
470 engineers monitor the countdown on endless rows of computers. Is the century-old vision of the man on the moon about to become a reality?
Now pressurized. 10, 9, ignition sequence start. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. All engine running. Liftoff. We have a liftoff. 32 minutes past the hour. Liftoff on Apollo 11.
3 people are about to travel to a place that until recently seemed impossible to reach. The moon. With a shuttle measuring 111 meters, the Knights of the Grail of the technological age, as the author Norman Mailer christened them, are traveling to their rendezvous with the moon. They are due to land in the Mare Tranquillitas, the Sea of Tranquility, on the near side of the satellite. Their message: we come in peace and on behalf of all humanity.
I remember being allowed to get up at night at 3 o'clock in the morning, and we were with the neighbors. They had a TV that worked, and we could watch it. The pictures were blurred. People were about to enter another celestial body for the first time, and you were a part of it here on Earth.
Television viewers didn't realize how dramatic the final minutes before the landing of the lunar ferry were. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin headed off in the lunar ferry. Michael Collins remained in the command capsule of the mothership. At first, everything went according to plan. Then, however, small orbit deviations led the lunar ferry on its approach onto our cosmic neighbour directly into an impact crater 33 meters wide and 4 meters deep. For a landing that could not have been more unfavourable. Armstrong takes over manual control and flies 60 meters further to a flat plane, with fuel for just another 20 seconds of flight time.
Down nicely, 200 feet, 4.5 down, 5.5 down. 4 forward, drift into the right level. 30 seconds forward. Contact light. Okay, engine stop. The Eagle has landed.
A new era of mankind, the future, is about to begin.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Columbia, this is Houston, AOS.
The flight to our cosmic neighbor took 102 hours and 45 minutes. 528 million people watched the launch. NASA estimates that every fourth inhabitant of the Earth watched at least part of the mission on TV.
I was around 5 years old back then, but I can still remember very clearly this hollow sound of the first words that were spoken there. These strange movements, I remember it very vividly. Actually, more than almost anything else that has to do with the moon.
It's Cold War time. The moon landing sends a political signal.
They were Americans, but it was all of humanity that took part. And that, I think, influenced the lives of millions of people.
The mission lasted a total of 8 days before the world welcomed the Apollo astronauts back home. The glowing dot in the sky is the command capsule re-entering the Earth's atmosphere. On July 24, 1969, at 1650 Universal World Time, the capsule landed in the Pacific.
I'm sure if you look 10,000 years into the future and look back at our era, you will remember one thing for sure, and that is that humans left the Earth. For the very first time, life on Earth left the planet. In retrospect, I'm sure that this is as significant as the first fish to leave the ocean.
The rendezvous in space, the climax of a long relationship between man and moon. After epochs of observing the night sky with the naked eye, the patterns of the moon with binoculars and telescopes, it took only 4 months for the next manned flight to take off. Twelve American astronauts are the only people to ever have set foot on the celestial body. The Apollo lunar mission ended with Apollo 17 in 1972. But none of the moonwalkers were as celebrated as much as the first 2 people on the moon. What more is there to come? Gloria Meinen is a scholar in cultural studies. She's working on a history of the future that she believes began in 1969.
Astronauts are really the new discoverers. In the 15th century, it was the seafarers, Columbus. Then came the cowboys, and then the astronauts in the 60s. It's quite interesting that the notion of the frontier, of the discovery of America, was taken over in space travel.
It's no wonder that people wanted to be closer to the moon, that the view from Earth eventually ceased to satisfy them. Back in 1500, a Chinese man is said to have dared to embark upon the first journey to the moon. Wan Hu, a visionary and inventor from the Ming Dynasty.
Gentlemen, let's go to the moon.
Legend has it that he attached 47 firework rockets to a chair. These were to provide the necessary thrust for a journey into space. When the smoke clears, Wan Hu and his chair have disappeared. No one knows how far he has traveled. His assistants certainly never saw him again. Nevertheless, he achieved his goal. A crater on the dark side of the moon is named after him in his honor, and because of his foolhardiness. One who is considered to be the first astronaut whose destination was the moon. And today,
it's also a personal dream of mine, to look a little further, to carry a little bit of light into the darkness. If I could, I wouldn't hesitate 1 second to go to the moon or to Mars.
Alexander Gerst, commander of the ISS. When he's not researching in space, he is enjoying the miracle of Earth without life support systems. Today he is already training for the next flight to the moon. In case technology fails, astronauts learn how to navigate with a sextant. Repair work on the outside of the spaceship is trained in a virtual laboratory. What looks more like a game here is intended to save lives in an emergency. The commander of the ISS repeatedly runs through every conceivable disruption in order to be able to react intuitively in a real emergency.
1, 2, 3.
And this at an altitude of about 400 kilometers above the Earth.
Thank you.
In space, nothing is possible without a spacesuit. The fitting for the upcoming expeditions.
Ja, der Raumanzug ist ein
A
faszinierendes
spacesuit is a fascinating thing. It's really a small spaceship. It has everything it needs to be considered a spaceship.
als Raumschiff zu gelten. Das heißt, hat
It has a life support system, an electrical system, a thermoregulation system, a radio system. It's fascinating that you can put all this in a suit that weighs 160 kilos, but that's still so small and maneuverable that you can move around in it.
so klein und wendig ist, dass man sich darin bewegen kann.
Seen from space, it becomes clear that we humans are an island people. We live on a tiny island surrounded by a large black ocean. For scientists like Alexander Gerst, we are well advised to explore the cosmic vastness. But long before science really flew out into space, poets and writers traveled to the moon. Some of their visions were so specific that space travel still looks as if it had copied some of their designs.
Hey, this is great. Talk about being a spaceman. This is it.
Die waren natürlich alle begeisterte Leser von Jules Verne.
They were, of course, all avid readers of Jules Verne, both the astronauts and Werner von Braun, for example. So if you read his 2 moon novels, it becomes obvious that he was not only a prophet, but that there also was a strong support by the astronauts and engineers to make reality resemble science fiction.
Die Realität Science Fiction auch gleicht.
Exactly 100 years before the Apollo mission, the French novelist and poet Jules Verne published his double novel De la Terre à la Lune, From the Earth to the Moon, which reads like an amazingly realistic draft of the later spaceflight.
Im Laufe des Jahres 1869 wurde die ganze Welt von einem beispiellosen Experiment in Atem gehalten. Die Mitglieder des Gang-Clubs waren auf die Idee verfallen, mit dem Mond in Verbindung zu treten. Jawohl, mit dem Mond. Und ein Geschoss in den Himmel hinaufzuschicken.
Jules Verne ist natürlich in dem
Jules Verne is, of course, in this context, the most important figure. He was, at his time and long into the 20th century, actually completely underestimated. About 100 years before the flight to the moon, he basically had everything already on his desk. And it's amazing how even different details can be found in the actual moon flights. Let's start with the number of astronauts. There were 3 on the first flight, and also 3 in his story. Then the place of launch, for example. I think it was 200 kilometers away from the actual one. And even the fact that the capsule ultimately landed in the Pacific.
Der es dann war, bis zu der Tatsache, dass die Kapsel dann am Ende im Pazifik gelandet ist.
50 years after Apollo, mankind is planning another journey to the moon. And this time it's for more than just a walk. ESA Director General Johann Dietrich Wörner has put the moon back into the spotlight.
When we started to focus more on the moon a few years ago, there was a lot of worldwide skepticism at first. They said, "What do you want there? It's a dead stone." Others said that it's not challenging enough. We want to go further. That has totally changed in the last 3-4 years.
The idea is taking shape. In the assembly halls of the space agencies, technicians are working on the spaceships of the future. Orion, the new American-European space capsule, is to take astronauts back to the moon for the first time. Whether it's going to be 2020, 23, or 25 is not yet clear, but the launch will come.
First of all, we're not going back to the moon, we're going forward to the moon. That's a very important point for me. We don't want to repeat what happened in '69. It's a completely different plan this time. And that's why I say forward to the moon. We're moving further on.
Space travel needs great visions. They are already within reach in elaborate animations. Our closest neighbour is seemingly still the most suitable for generating the necessary enthusiasm for a project, so that it can be also financed. The plan is to build research stations on the moon, a kind of base camp for which one can also penetrate deeper into space.
In a nutshell, the moon and Mars are nothing more than the 8th and 9th continents of the Earth. This is our cosmic environment. They seem far away, but if you think about it, the moon is a week's journey away. It's less than a journey to Antarctica took 100 years ago.
Daring engineers, experimental scientists, and inventors were willing to risk their lives for the idea of building a rocket that one day would reach the planets. Without these pioneers, space travel would be inconceivable today. For the explorers among us, at some point the Earth ceased to be a gripping challenge. There were no new destinations, so the new motto was, "Off to the moon."
I find it fascinating what people can imagine. Zeppelins, airships, journeys to the moon, everything had already been thought up before it actually happened.
In 1902, the premiere of one of the first science fiction films is celebrated in Paris. In the film, the director Georges Méliès sends a group of astronomers to the moon. Georges Méliès steers the rocket bang into the eye of our cosmic neighbour. Ouch. Jules Verne's novel, The Journey to the Moon, provided the blueprint for this defining work from the early years of film history.
Georges Méliès, that's of course fascinating, almost like a caricature. The way the rocket hits the moon cake, I think he's also taking this whole fascination with the moon for a ride.
Cologne-based art historian Andreas Blum can't stop thinking about the moon. A few years ago, he collected around 150 exhibits that showed how people have approached the moon again and again over the past 5 centuries.
As is often the case with exhibitions, you have an idea, and with the moon there are, of course, millions of pictures, and then you start collecting. The greatest thing is the pictures you didn't even know about that you suddenly find.
Caspar David Friedrich, Edouard Manet, and many other artists have painted the atmospheric moon for us. But the art historian does not find what is probably the most astonishing painting among the big names. It comes from a Bavarian landscape painter.
He painted the moon as if he was standing on it, with the Earth in the background, exactly as the astronauts from the Apollo mission saw it.
And this, although when Wilhelm Kranz painted his ideal moon landscape in 1919, man had still to set foot on the Earth's companion. It was only the Apollo astronauts that took the famous photo of the rising Earth.
Die Apollo-Astronauten haben es uns beschrieben.
The Apollo astronauts told us that from the moon, you can almost cover the Earth with your thumb in front of your eye. Everything you know, the whole of life on Earth, if you can hide it behind a thumb, that does something for us, with us.
On December 24, 1968, the astronauts of the Apollo 8 mission saw the Earth rise. Earthrise, the photograph they were able to take while in lunar orbit, was soon to gain iconic status. Arguably, it is still the most influential environmental photograph ever taken.
Ultimately, this flight turned our gaze around from moon to Earth. It really shook people up inside to see the Earth from the outside. And ultimately, it was the beginning of the environmental movement. The Earth, the blue planet, as a jewel in space, the island of life on which one could see no borders. After a few days, all the astronauts only saw this one Earth as our common home.
For the astronomer, the insight is the story worth being retold, the story of mankind and the moon. In his Theatre for Humankind and Environmental Space, as Thomas Kraupe calls the Hamburg Planetarium, you can experience it up close.
One small step for man.
Here he steers the Apollo mission.
It's a kind of flight simulator that allows you to be an astronaut without taking the risks, without a lack of oxygen. Of course, you're not leaving the Earth, but you can fly anywhere and in 360 degrees.
On this evening, the program Fly Me to the Moon is taking place, a musical review around the Apollo mission. Recent musical compositions based on the moon landing could easily fill an entire evening event. And then, in front of the planetarium, lovers, insomniacs, and moon-worshipping space travel enthusiasts meet and let themselves be enchanted by the moon. Paris in 1830. This poster caused a sensation. Claude Rougerie, known for his daring stunts and unprecedented fireworks, is planning to send a child into space and bring it back safely. No one has ever dared to try this before.
Die Rakete fliegt in den Himmel. Und wenn sie dann wieder zur Erde zurückstürzt, keine Angst, keine Angst. Dann öffnet sich der Fallschirm.
Monsieur Claude Rougerie?
Anwesend. Was? Hier. Die Papiere für die Starterlaubnis und nun bitte. Die Rakete wird also zur Erde zurückstürzen?
Im Namen der Stadt Paris ersuche ich Sie, den Start einer bemannten Rakete unverzüglich abzubrechen.
Kommandant, die Rakete ist perfekt.
Claude Rougerie, pyrotechnician of distinction, has already used the rocket to shoot a lamb up into the air and brought it back to Earth alive with a parachute. For Rougerie, the dream of the first manned rocket flight has been shattered. The ingenious inventor has no idea he is far ahead of his time, far too much. To date, parachutes safely bring astronauts back to Earth from space. Florida, Hundreds of thousands of moon-loving people come to the Kennedy Space Center every year to follow in the footsteps of the Apollo astronauts. The relics of the technical adventure can still be admired here today. The legendary lunar ferry, the Eagle, and the gigantic launcher. But the highlight for all tourists is probably to record their own moon landing in the studio. One small step for everyone. The further back in time the event took place, the less likely it seems to many people that it happened at all. To them, the Apollo mission is one big lie, propaganda, because the space race had to be won. Suspicious footprints, a waving flag, no crater under the lunar ferry. For conspiracy theorists, this is all evidence that the moon landing never took place. They believed that the first steps on the moon were recorded in a film studio on a secret military base.
According to research, there's a growing number of people who believe this because they did not personally experience it on television at that time. That seems to be a critical factor.
Around 400,000 people were involved in the Apollo program. To swear them all to secrecy would have been quite difficult to achieve. The Soviet rivals were also able to monitor and locate the radio traffic of the American astronauts. Anyone who wants solid proof that the Apollo landings really took place should go to Bavaria. The Geodetic Institute Wetzel can be found close to the Czech border. This is the home of the Lunar Laser Rangers. Without the moon landing, they would not be able to do their observations.
Well, if it's all just a bluff, how did the reflector get there? Because we've been able to spot it from here for over 50 years now. They had also already successfully measured the distance to the moon using laser when the astronauts were still up there.
Even before the astronauts raised the flag of the United States, they position a laser reflector on the surface of the moon, allowing for extremely accurate measurements to calculate the distance to Earth. For this purpose, laser beams are sent from ground stations to the reflector on the moon. The running time of the laser is measured. This is how the distance between the Earth and the moon has been determined for 50 years. The data show that the moon moves 3.8 centimeters away from the Earth every year. They want to get closer to the moon again. Harald Hiesinger and Markus Landgraf were commissioned by the European Space Agency to find new targets for the next manned lunar mission. What is exciting for the planners of the mission is that water was found on the moon, or to be more precise, ice. It can only be found in deep craters where the sun never shines. The temperatures there are around minus 250 degrees Celsius. Should astronauts really land there?
The water on the moon is a tremendous resource for us, because the astronauts on the moon's surface can drink it, and we're able to extract oxygen from it and ultimately also rocket fuel. Plus, every ounce of water that we don't have to bring with us from Earth ultimately makes our mission cheaper.
Plans for a lunar station are taking shape. The South Pole at the edge of the Shackleton crater is a possible location for a research village. It is said that there is not only water there, but also sun to provide the necessary energy. Scientists all over the world are already working on designs for lunar colonies. In Bremen, at the Center for Applied Space Technology and Microgravity, Christiane Heinecke conceives and designs ideas for living under extreme conditions.
My work is to ensure that when people land on the moon, they can move into a house there, move into a habitat, and survive there.
The demands placed on extraterrestrial colonization are enormous. Scientists must be able to live, work, and research on the surface of the celestial body. Despite cosmic radiation, meteorite impacts, and extreme temperature fluctuations.
I think it's only a matter of time before a separate culture will develop on the moon. A separate society with its own moon music or moon painting or whatever. I think this will happen sooner rather than later.
Science fiction author Arne Alert estimates that 2044 could be the year in which this happens. In his debut novel, Moonatics, his hero sets off on a journey to the moon. Climate change, the growing threat of terrorism. The Earth has finally ceased to be a place of longing for mankind. The globetrotters of the world are headed for a new destination. The moon. And the cosmic travel guides agree. The Aristarchus crater and the Schrotus Valley are the new hotspots. Both are located on the near side of the moon. The hero of the novel simply climbs aboard a spacecraft to take a vacation on the moon. The marvelous view of the rising Earth is, of course, included.
The starting point of the story is Lavania, a luxury hotel where the protagonist actually only plans to stay for 2 weeks, but then ultimately stays for 2 years. And to his surprise, because it wasn't in the travel guide, he discovers that there's a hippie settlement a few craters away. And in the end, this hippie community on the moon represents utopia, of course. But unfortunately, the project developers arrive and want to drive the hippies away. So, a very earthly problem, I'd say.
Lunar travel for all is an idea that has been around for quite some time. Moon tourism could become reality in our century. But despite his intensive research, Arne Alert still can't understand why people are so keen on visiting the moon.
Of course, there is the question of whether a travel destination like this makes sense. Because basically, you could just as well be living inside a nuclear reactor as on the moon. There's no water, no air to breathe, cosmic radiation. The best thing about the moon is probably the view of the Earth.
And for that, even our science fiction writer from Berlin would set out on a journey to the moon. A spaceflight today would certainly not look like it did for early film architects and directors. The question of what awaits us on the moon when we get there has always captured man's imagination. Could human history be reinvented on the moon? With astronomy student Friede, legendary film pioneer Fritz Lang first sent a woman to the moon in 1928. Together with her fiancé and the moon expert Manfeld, she lands on the far side of the satellite. Manfeld suspects large gold deposits there, and is proved correct. The Apollo missions massively changed the image of the moon. The analysis of the rock samples showed that the moon is a child of the Earth. Without the moon rock collected by cosmic researchers during their Apollo missions, we would still be unaware of this today. What can scientists expect to discover when they set off to study the celestial body with modern technology?
Countries throughout the world. We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are.
We don't really know anything about the moon. We were in 6 different places. But one mustn't forget that the moon is many times the size of Europe. If you land in 6 different places, pick up a couple of rocks, you don't know anything about it yet.
But what we do know about it has now stirred the interest of the energy industry. Large quantities of helium-3 have been deposited in the dust on the surface of the moon over billions of years. Many fusion researchers see the isotope as the energy source of the future. They argue that helium-3-based reactors could even be operated safely in the middle of cities, thus solving the Earth's energy problems.
There are many who have now said, we want to be part of it, companies all over the world, but especially institutions like NASA, for example, the American Space Agency, the Japanese, or the Russians. Even the Chinese have said they have concrete plans.
One future vision of scientists working on energy generation consists of a small fleet of spaceships flying to the moon and establishing a manned base there. Subsequently, helium-3 is collected by astronauts on the surface of the Earth's satellite and brought back to Earth. In addition to transport ships, a space elevator is used for this. How we and the moon will cope, nobody knows yet. It is high time to clarify a few legal questions in the name of mankind, says Stefan Hobe, head of the Institute for Space Law in Cologne.
In 1967, the Space Treaty came into being, which after all has been ratified by 106 states. This means that no celestial body can be appropriated by a single nation. It belongs to humanity as a whole.
In addition to establishing research stations on the moon, there are also plans for large-scale mining operations. Gold is calling. Stefan Hobe therefore travels from one lunar mining conference to the next. He wants to take the moon side.
I see it as my task to be the spoilsport, because I think that in all the excitement about a gold rush, people are quite likely to leave the moon behind in conditions that jeopardize environmental stability up there.
Sozusagen die Stabilität dort oben weiter gewährleistet.
Having won the first race to the moon 50 years ago, the Americans are obviously determined to stay at the forefront. In 2015, the United States of America granted itself the mining rights for the moon.
The Americans are convinced that they achieved a big success with the law they created. But I'm trying to explain to them that they can't do that. That as the moon basically belongs to everyone, consequently, the legislation has to be made by all of us. It requires an international conference. And because we've actually had the draft since 1979, it's high time we work on it.
Good business can be done with the moon. That's always been the case. During the Apollo launches, huge amounts of moon cocktails, Apollo cocktails, and liftoff martinis were sold. Today, there's a long list of full moon products, and everyone advertises with the special powers of the full moon. Full moon is the time to bake, brew, and make cheese. It's possible to buy all kinds of things for a full moon picnic on Earth that advertise with the power of the moon. From moon bread to moon salami. Everything is said to taste fuller when it is made in the light of the satellite. But what will Earthlings living on the moon eat in the future? A Garden of Eden will be delivered to Antarctica in 2018. At minus 45 degrees Celsius, tests will be conducted as to how astronauts and moon dwellers could be supplied with fruit and vegetables in the future. A vegetable garden in the eternal ice. That is the mission. Only a few hundred meters away from the Neumeier research station, the scientists from Bremen set up their greenhouse. They've spent the last 2 years testing whether it is possible to develop a vegetable garden in a 13 square meter container without soil, daylight, or pesticides. Project manager Daniel Schubert is accompanying the test phase from Bremen. In an emergency, he is able to control the systems in the greenhouse from a local control center.
Antarctica is pretty similar to the Moon and Mars. The Neumeier station is completely closed off. Supply is not possible at the moment. You can't just fly in and out. That means the crew is dependent entirely upon itself. And that's a scenario we can't test anywhere else.
For the past 3 days, the team was unable to travel the few hundred meters to the garden container because of snowstorms. And today, too, it's difficult. On the Moon, it would not only be minus 45 degrees Celsius. There, man and material would have to withstand minus 170 degrees.
Ja, hi Konrad.
Hi Paul.
Hallo.
Geht's dir gut?
Ja, mir geht's gut.
The Bremen team has an appointment for the daily Skype talk with their colleagues on site.
Warte mal.
Ja.
Okay. Hallo Paul.
Soweit sieht alles gut aus.
Everything looks good so far. The plants are growing great. We've had a good harvest again this week, so we're really producing a lot here. Lettuces, for example, I have 24 lettuce heads every 2 weeks. They really do last 2 weeks until we've eaten them, and the next ones are ready. As far as the cucumbers are concerned, we sometimes get 3 to 4 kilograms per week, plus 1 to 2 kilograms per week of tomatoes. The vegetables I produce and harvest here are very well received by the crew. We eat vegetables and lettuce from the greenhouse pretty much every day, and we haven't been supplied with fresh food for almost 4 months now. So all the fresh goods harvested here are very welcome.
Alles Frische, was hier geerntet wird, herzlich willkommen.
It's the 10-man Antarctic crew at the Neumeier that initially benefits from the plentiful harvest. The ISS crew too will soon be able to take a smaller version of the garden with them into space. A Garden of Eden to go, so to speak.
Ein Thema, das oft unterschätzt wird.
An issue that's often underestimated is the importance of food on board a space station. When you're in space for half a year, it's really important to be able to give your body everything it needs to not get sick. And on the other hand, also as psychological support. This is really very important, that you still have something to look forward to for lunch or dinner, that you have a good meal.
Dass man ein gutes Essen hat.
It's also important that you have a variety of food, different dishes that you bring with you, and ideally, sometimes something fresh.
It's clear that space agencies have the Moon in their sights. But there's something that's jeopardizing their missions. In our orbit, a serious problem is growing: garbage in space.
Nowadays, we all benefit from space travel in our daily lives, each and every one of us. The weather forecast, for example, would be inconceivable without space travel. Satellite navigation, it's ubiquitous, whether in the car or on foot or by bicycle, would also be impossible without satellites. Telecommunications. During a World Cup, when everyone is glued to the screen, where do the signals come from? Via satellite, of course. And therefore, if this infrastructure is in danger, then our daily lives are in danger.
Around 750,000 objects are circling the Earth. The 3,000 satellites that no longer work are the risk. Houston, we have a problem. Colliding space debris.
These collisions generate more fragments, and these fragments are candidates for new collisions to come. So follow-on collisions, if you like. And that the largest fear that we have is that we enter in some sort of cascading effect, where one collision triggers the next one. And this is not anything that will happen within a microsecond like in the movie Gravity, but this is something that will set in slowly, hardly noticeable, but unstoppable.
There are plans for a kind of galactic garbage disposal to clean up the orbit in future. The ESA laboratories are working at full speed on technical solutions for this. gripping arms and nets for retrieving disused satellites are being tested. A young scientist has also set herself the goal of bringing the problem into the public eye. Fatoumata Kebe is an astrophysicist and has just published her doctoral thesis on the trajectories of space debris. Space is far away, so you can't see the problems there. So when we come and say, listen, man has also polluted space, then people are usually surprised. Broken satellites, burnt-out rocket stages, even lost screwdrivers and splintered paint particles. Around 6,500 tons of scrap metal are meanwhile racing around above our heads. A problem that affects us all if we want to continue to use our smartphones, the internet, and navigation systems in the future and want to go to the moon. NASA has stated in a study that if we continue to leave space debris on this scale, as is currently the case, by 2025 we will no longer be able to send objects into space without them being hit by at least one piece of scrap. If we send a mission to the moon, the risk is even higher, because the rocket has to pass through several orbits on its way. No matter where man dares to go, even the first explorers have left more than footprints in the lunar dust. The Apollo astronauts left about 180 tons of equipment on the moon, and that for only 6 short visits. The aim is to find a sustainable way of interacting with the moon and space.
Use of services from space is in everybody's interest. Mitigating the problem, space debris, should be in everybody's interest as well, because we have generated a global problem that can only be solved on a global scale. It needs a global response.
Viewed from Earth, the moon is still in mint condition. The photographer Ben Proschaud is on the trail of the celestial body. Today, he has an appointment with Luna for a photo shoot near Frankfurt. But the moon is a diva. He must prepare himself carefully in order to get a beautiful picture.
Normally, the moon, like the sun, rises in the east. East is about there. But over the course of the year, this shifts a bit back and forth. And you can now use an astronomy program to calculate precisely that today the moon will rise 22 degrees south of the east, exactly behind the skyscrapers. And this is virtually a line that I draw on a map from the skyscrapers exactly in this angle. And ideally, we would now be 200 meters further to the right, but there is a road, there are trees, we can't see the skyline. That means that this here is the ideal compromise.
The question tonight will be, who is shining more beautifully? The full moon or the lights of the big city? The moon keeps the photographer waiting. After all, which adored one shows up on time for the first date? Then the weather threatens to ruin the party. But suddenly, very briefly, the moon pushes the curtain of clouds away and reveals who is the fairest creature of the night sky.
I'm glad that I live here in an earthly paradise, with chirping birds, green trees and running waters. But as for the moon, I gladly leave it to the Apollo astronauts to visit it. I don't envy them.
The moon inspired us to set off for new dimensions. With it, we have rediscovered the Earth. It points to where the real challenges of mankind lie, in our own Garden of Eden. Half a century after the first moon landing, the love affair between man and the moon has anything but cooled. Will we be able to treat the 8th continent more carefully than the Earth? Only the next generations will know.
We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.